I say we start in a minute, if we can please have our seats. Okay, good afternoon once again, and welcome all to this session that is looking at the scaling solutions for resilient animal and aquatic food systems. And we'll be looking at showcasing innovations and partnerships that deliver climate, nutrition, and equity gains. So welcome all, and we have a very exciting program ahead of us. I know we are few in the room, but we'll try make sure that we even have a richer conversation by making sure everyone is integrated, and hopefully you'll pick up something from the session and also feel free to contribute. For today's session, we have two main parts. So we'll start with opening remarks, of course, but then we'll have first two presentations. And it's through these two presentations that we'll be showcasing some of the innovations that are being led by the CGIAR. This will be followed by a panel discussion where we'll be diving deeper into some of the topics, some of the opportunities, and to identify entry points as we move forward. And then we'll open it up for discussion. And I think the beauty of having fewer people in the room is that we have much more time for interaction. So feel free to contribute and engage in the session. And with that, I would like to welcome Todd Rosenstock, who will be giving our opening remarks. Todd Rosenstock is the director of the Climate Action Science Program, who will be setting the scene for us. And hopefully he can also let us know about the two main science programs that are co-hosting this side event, that is the Climate Action and the and Aquatic Food Systems programs. Thank you. Welcome.
So thanks so much. And do we have people online, Vanessa? Or no people? Yeah, virtually. Yeah. How many people do we have? 10. So welcome to all of our virtual participants and to all of our in-person participants. Thanks for coming to see us today. So today I just wanted to give some brief remarks, and we've all seen plenty of panels where people have read off their teleprompters. So it's given, see? I like jokes, so I got a good laugh there. I got a couple chuckles. We're in the right mood then, and so I'm putting it aside. I haven't even read what they were told me to say. So, so look, what we're here today is really to talk about one of the biggest issues facing climate in agriculture: animal and aquatic foods. You know, we for years we know that animals and livestock are critical for nutrition. They're critical for deforestation. They're critical for poverty, and they're critical for livelihoods. But they haven't been really on the table, right? We haven't been talking about them here in the negotiations. We haven't been talking about them enough in the side events. And so it's really a wonder and really great that we're over the last few years, they've been getting much more attention here and much more discussion about not only how they contribute to the concerns around climate change, but actually how they can be part of the solutions for farmers and ranchers and fishermen and first all over the world. I'm looking at Michelle here as an aquatic food expert. And so here, this session is really trying to merge two of the key programs that are just starting within the CGIAR. One is the sustainable animal and aquatic food systems. And so this is where a lot of our livestock work, a lot of our aquaculture work is progressing, and with our climate action program, which I lead. And so here, this is really this merger and this connection and the intersection of the two of the really critical discussion points within the COP and within the climate change negotiations. So what I see is this is really an opportunity. It's an opportunity for us to have a discussion with you. It's an opportunity for us to have a discussion with those online about how we can leverage these two new programs, how we can leverage new partnerships to build an action agenda alongside the COP's action agenda on these issues. We have a really exciting program led by Lucy Njuguna and a number of speakers. And so I ask you all to be heavily engaged, speak up, tell us your ideas, and let's see how we can move forward together. So back to you, Lucy.
Okay, thank you very much, Todd. Indeed, it's always good to have you open the session because he always drops in a joke. So that sets the scene and the mood. Next up, we'd like to have our first presentation, which will be delivered by Michelle, who is a senior scientist at the World Fish. And she'll be highlighting some of the key innovations and some of the work being undertaken with regard to climate adaptation in aquaculture. Michelle, you're most welcome. A round of applause as she comes up.
Thank you so much, Lucy, and thank you also, Todd, for kicking us off with your opening remarks. Last day at COP, it's a little bit hot. I think for many of us, the stretch has gone a little bit, but at the same time, I'm actually feeling quite excited at this moment. I think Todd just reminded me of how, for a very long time, a lot of the discussions that we at World Fish do are kind of along the lines of like, oh, and don't forget about the fish, and then farmers, and fishers, and then also within COP in the climate negotiations, talk is about food, and it's like, and that includes fish. So for a very long time, I think our narrative has been very much awareness raising. I think now I actually have to apologize because I have to leave the event early to go to another event where we're hosting a couple of governments talking about how they have now included fisheries and aquaculture into their NDCs, and to actually start having that discussion about that implementation of climate action in this important sector. And so before headed there, it's also really nice that we now get to talk about the concrete innovations and solutions that we have to offer towards climate action in this sector. And I don't know where I'm supposed to be pointing. Okay, great. All right, so just in many ways, there's a lot of similarities, I think, between livestock and aquatic foods. There's also a couple of differences, so I just wanted to do a brief introduction into the diversity of aquatic foods. So what's at stake under climate change when it comes to aquatic foods? It's that it's a highly diverse sector. More than 2,500 species are fished and farmed around the world, and that makes the challenge a little bit different than when we talk about livestock and finding solutions there. We know that these are rich in essential nutrients. They are a key source of protein for nearly 3 billion people around the world, but they're also really engines of economy. So 11% of agricultural trade by value is from aquatic foods. Women are highly important to the sector. Nearly 500 million livelihoods depend on this sector, and they have a comparatively low carbon footprint. But I should say there's sustainability issues that continue to exist in other realms. And so these are the benefits that these aquatic food systems deliver, and that's what at stake in a changing climate. In marine fisheries, we're really starting to see that fish are on the move, whereas in aquaculture, we're seeing that drought, flooding, and heat extremes are threatening productivity. Okay, and so what we've done over the last couple of years is really map all of the different adaptation and mitigation pathways that exist for the sector. And today I just wanted to walk you through a few of the different ways in which World Fish is contributing to some of these solutions. And I've split these out into 3 different levels. And for the CG aficionados here, you might think of this as SAF, climate action, and multifunctional landscapes. But things happening at the production level really focus on bioscience innovations around genetics, feed, farm practices. We're also starting to work on renewable energy use in farming systems, as well as addressing post-harvest loss, food loss and waste. When it comes to people, we're really focusing on climate safety nets, livelihood diversification, promotion of social and economic inclusion and rights as a core element of reducing climate vulnerability. And we're increasingly seeing that really working through locally led adaptation processes is a really transformative way to add climate resilience. And then finally, aquatic foods are really deeply embedded in aquatic ecosystems. And so we also work on nature-based and integrated aquaculture as a way to produce fish within the environment, as well as sustainable fisheries management led by communities. And I'll just give brief examples of some of these and hopefully not use too much of your time. So on the production side, our main key product is called Gift. It's the genetically improved farmed tilapia. Tilapia is one of the most farmed aquaculture species, and through genetic improvement, we've been able to reduce its emissions by more than 30%, and are also seeing that because the fish can grow in a shorter harvest period, we can deal better with situations of water shortage. Renewable energy is actually a sort of emerging issue for us at WorldFish, and this has been kindly supported by the Norwegian embassy in Egypt, where we're really starting to pilot different renewable energy solutions on farm. And it turns out that this is not only a mitigation solution, but is actually helping to adapt to climate change as well, as we're seeing that energy demand for things like water aeration is going up during hot weather events. And then one of the most effective ways to address resilience and emissions in food systems is, of course, through reducing food loss and waste. So this is an example of Solomon Islands, where we were working with solar-powered freezers. And currently, through our Asia-Africa Blue Tech Superhighway project, we're piloting different solar-powered technologies for fish drying and fish smoking. Okay, then I wanted to highlight a few of our people innovations. Sorry, okay, and I think I wanted to start here with really the process. So we're currently working in Timor-Leste on applying the principles of locally led adaptation in aquatic food communities. And the process of going through these principles is really allowing the community to articulate what are their needs when it comes to climate adaptation, and to prioritize those in budgeting and planning. Oh, it's auto advancing. Okay, so one of the innovations that we might then adopt through in a climate adaptation process is deploying better early warning systems. So today, I think in CG, there's a lot of work being done on early warning systems on terrestrial agriculture, but currently there is no, to my knowledge, functioning aquaculture or early warning systems out there in the world. So at WorldFish, we now have a pilot early warning system for aquaculture farmers called Blue Resilience. And through the Climate Action Program, we'll be implementing this in Bangladesh and Zambia next year for testing the impact. As an example of an alternative livelihood, I wanted to highlight the Artemia shrimp. These are tiny shrimp that can live in really salt water conditions, which is increasingly becoming an issue in Bangladesh with saltwater intrusion. And these are providing an alternative income and a source of feed for aquaculture. And then finally, as a last example on the people side, I really wanted to highlight our gender transformative approaches that we're piloting in Tanzania. Here we've worked with on co-designing climate smart fish processing technologies with women, working on women's leaderships in beach management committees, and then also addressing gender-based violence in fishing communities. And some of these practices are now being scaled through Tanzanian national and local policy, and are really addressing the root causes of climate vulnerability. And then finally, I think what really sets aquaculture aside in sort of the climate and food discussion is some of the aquaculture systems that are out there are actually some of the most sustainable ones in the world. So seaweed bivalve farming are some of the most sustainable ways of farming food. And we are implementing production systems in different parts of the world. And one of these systems is called integrated multi-trophic aquaculture, which is a very long way of saying that you're farming different types of aquatic foods together. So by farming bivalve, seaweed, and fish together, you can reduce the inputs that are required and increase the resilience of the system. Another example of an integrated system is rice fish fisheries. And we're seeing that farmers are increasing their incomes and actually reducing their impact on the environment, because if you use a lot of pesticides on your rice, your fish will die. So it's a nice win-win for income and environment. And then finally, not solidly in the climate realm, but one that's really critical for enabling better environmental management is our PESCAS digital system, which is a vessel tracking system that is allowing us to better map where small-scale fishers are fishing, and as a result, help set a quota for the fisheries. In this case, Timor-Leste. So this is currently being adopted by the national government for their national fisheries management system. And then this was me trying to do hokey graphics on a Tuesday night, but mostly trying to highlight how each of these innovations are not really just being implemented in isolation, but how we're using climate risk and needs assessments to identify the right combination of innovations that work in a specific context, and then are working through, for example, policy scaling, business models, and access to finance to scale these solutions in the communities that we work in. And then given that we're here at COP, one specific way that I wanted to highlight in which we're scaling is through inclusion in national policy. So last year, we released these guidelines on how aquatic foods can be better integrated into national climate strategies. And in like an hour, I get to celebrate some of the fruits of that labor. We learned earlier this week that Mexico, as a result of engagement around this product, has included aquatic foods into its NDCs. And so that's one specific way in which we're hoping to continue to drive attention to this in climate objectives, and hopefully make sure that they're then more visible in climate financing as well. So I think that was it. Yes, thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Michelle. I think I've heard really interesting things from your presentation, including this idea of working across value chains and also looking at how different value chains can be integrated. Really good highlighting the work around gender and social inclusion, which was really fantastic and a really important piece for this particular session. And of course, locally led adaptation. So we are going to have another presentation, which will be delivered by video. Then after that, I will open it up for any clarifying questions that will mostly be addressed to Michelle. So if you can have the next presentation, which is by Anthony Whitbread, who is the program lead at the International Livestock Research Institute.
Livestock farming environment. It's a pleasure to have a chance to speak to you this morning. Now, I'm going to cover an area around livestock and the livestock innovations that are bringing us resilience and low emission systems in the low and middle income countries, mostly Africa and Asia, Southeast Asia that I'm presenting today. Now, I'm going to make an assumption, because I've only got 10 minutes, that a lot of these points have been raised and that the audience understands that animal source feeds are essential from a nutritional point of view, that they're essential for building resilience in smallholder farming systems. And that these big drivers in the low and middle income countries, particularly urbanization, rising incomes, and population growth, are leading to a huge demand for animal products, livestock products. And the pathways that we're talking about today are really about transforming smallholder livestock systems. And I also have to assume that people in the audience understand the challenges of greenhouse gas emissions, particularly methane from enteric fermentation and from applied and deposited manure, as a major challenge to livestock industries, particularly ruminants, goats, sheep, cattle, and other ruminants. Also, I have to assume that the audience understands the challenges many smallholder farmers and livestock keepers are facing in managing their system in the face of an inherently variable climate, but also the impact of climate change that's bringing us many more challenges in terms of extreme events, drought, heat stress, delayed rains, and challenges in forecasting these events.
and that climate risk remains a huge disincentive to invest into technologies that are often risk reducing and improve productivity. So with those assumptions, my talk is mostly about how ILRI and its partners are bringing together science around health, genetics, nutrition, the environment, political economy, and policy to develop climate smart livestock systems. And we're trying to do this through a climate lens. So the lens of mitigation and adaptation, and recognizing that many of the sciences that we're doing, while they may be linked to productivity, they will often have an impact on mitigation, potentially through emissions intensity by improving productivity, but also through adaptation, through helping livestock and the systems become more resilient. And I'll explain a little bit about the different sciences and how we're trying to add this, this lens of mitigation and adaptation in our work. The sorts of farming systems we target at ILRI in Africa, Asia, South Asia mostly are semi-intensive. So these would be livestock systems like dairy or fattening sort of smallholder systems, through to the crop livestock systems. These are covering a large proportion of the landscape in these geographies. And this is where you have crops as the predominant livelihood, but you almost always have livestock held by farmers, and they could be poultry, sheep or goats, and sometimes dairy animals. And livestock bring a lot of resilience and nutrition and income to these poor, resource poor farming families. But also we work a lot in the pastoral systems. Now, by pastoral systems, I'm talking about the rangeland systems that cover in excess of 40% of the landscape in Africa, for example. And a lot of our work, therefore, is focusing on how do you develop low emission agricultural systems that do support the aims of our institutions. We want to support productive, equitable, and sustainable livelihoods in these livestock-based systems. We also recognize that you can't get uptake of innovations by livestock keepers and other actors until you're addressing the enabling environment, linking to the private sector for scaling of inputs and services, engaging in policy support, understanding trade-offs, linking our work to inclusivity in terms of gender, youth, and yeah, inclusivity overall. So I just wanted to give you a number of examples of the sort of science we're doing and how that links to climate. With is the animal health solutions. And here we're finding fairly new work showing that animal health has a big implication on both emissions and adaptation. In fact, there's recent work that shows parasite control and vaccinations can reduce greenhouse gas emissions intensity in excess of 30%. Work in Kenya shows that reducing abortion or calf mortality in the dairy herd can decrease absolute emissions in excess of 6%, up to 14%. So these are really important aspects of our work that they're almost low-hanging fruit. On the other hand, you have climate affecting disease patterns and zoonotic diseases. And so our work is about trying to scale vaccines against transboundary diseases. And there's a whole range of diseases, acronyms there I won't read out. But one of the key things we've done in Mali, and that's what the map is there on the right-hand side, is about trying to understand where the development of a recent innovation in vaccine technology, a thermotolerant vaccine against a disease called PPR, a very lethal disease. And now this thermotolerant vaccine is able to be adapted to a hot climate. So these sorts of innovations are then able to be scaled in these sorts of geographies. So our work through the climate lens of animal health solutions is about building baseline data sets on animal health and trying to link it to greenhouse gases and adaptation, trying to develop and scale herd management practices, understanding risk, mapping epidemiology, and then starting to integrate climate disease forecasting for early detection. If we move on to another science that ILRI and its partners does, it's around genetics. And genetics has long been used in livestock industries to improve herd performance. You select your best animals for their performance. And the curve on the right-hand side shows that there's a big variation in the emissions intensity of a dairy herd, and in this case, Ethiopia. So if we can actually select animals down in the top 10% of Ethiopian milk production, we can quickly reduce methane output. And so work by my colleagues have been looking at the heritability of selection, and it's now found to be a feasible selection criteria. And they're using indirect of methane from milk samples, for instance, and you start to use it in phenotyping. In terms of adaptation, dairy herds are extremely sensitive to heat stress, and it reduces milk production 4 to 14%. But again, there's large genetic differences in animal response to these heat events, and it's now being able to be linked to a temperature humidity index that allows us to select. So through scaling digital platforms and tools, through scaling genomic prediction pipelines, and through developing partnerships and networks, we're able to bring this to bear on these issues of adaptation and mitigation. Animal nutrition solutions, so many exciting things happening in that area as well. I think the world has finally discovered that animals really need feed, and we're really short of feed. In terms of genetic improvement of feeds and forages, we're working with our colleagues in CGIAR and ICADA to develop low methane forages. So forages that may have secondary metabolites that reduce methanogenesis and the production of methane, and getting those into the feed supply chains. The feeding systems will also be developed to balance feed rations and feeding systems. We're doing work around using crop residues, which are a major feed source, and bringing them into high quality animal feed, and also exploiting crop germplasm for better quality studies. So our work is about discovering new feed, food and forage cultivars and varieties. It's about trying to scale applications of digital feed. It's about trying to build seed systems that support these efforts. Another major area of science for ILRI and its partners is around environmental solutions. And this goes from the whole area of developing emission factors and inventories for local conditions to develop effective mitigation strategies, through to supporting national greenhouse gas inventory and the MRV that supports NDC reporting. We also have a lot of work on restoring landscapes, both developing participatory methods for restoring landscapes, but also how you quantify the changes in those landscapes in terms of carbon fluxes. So to wrap up, in conclusion, there's an urgent transformation of livestock systems needed to support and address livelihood, nutrition, climate, and environmental challenges. I think that's very clear. We must shift the narrative towards integrated science solutions, which have this climate lens, this adaptation, mitigation climate lens, and look for co-benefits where we can in low and middle income countries settings. To do this, we also need to strengthen the North-South, South-South partnerships and build capacity and shape donor and policy agendas. And we also need to strengthen MRV for the low and middle income country contexts, which means collecting local data, building emission factors, models, and capacity. Thank you for your attention, and all the best for the rest of the session.
Thank you so much. I think that was another very insightful presentation on some of the innovations that are being pioneered by ILRI. And I think Anthony has made a very clear case of how we can get the mitigation and resilience building core benefits in the context of the livestock systems, highlighting, for example, the use of technology, breeding, feed and nutrition improvement for livestock, and also most importantly, some of the work on MRV, because it helps us to quantify some of the benefits that are coming out of these innovations. I'll open it up briefly for any clarifying questions. I know Michelle has to rush to the next session, but I will take the opportunity and have her answer maybe 1 or 2 questions before she leaves. Or if you want to share any experience you have from your context that is relatable to what Michelle presented.
Hi, how are you? Thank you. It was a really great presentation. I have a very quick question, which is about how you mentioned several times people. And in one way or another, we're more familiar to track progress on solution measure implementation. How do you track the benefits of those solutions to people, that people are increasing resilience?
They should have given me like 2 more seconds to come up with a smart answer, but it didn't necessarily arrive. I will, I think this is an issue we're constantly trying to improve on, and actually was having some really good conversations with people from CGIAR this morning who are working on locally led adaptation as well, which is, usually how we track progress on adaptation and resilience, which is like how many people that we reach with our climate information services, for example. But does that truly measure to what extent resilience has been enhanced, and is there levels of like how well you've done? So my answer is maybe I don't have a good answer as to like how we are doing it, but more to say that I would like us to get better at doing that in a deep and thoughtful way, rather than just counting number of people that you've reached. And I don't know if Todd has thoughts from how we want to do this in climate action as a program as a whole. No, Todd came with his joke lens and is done on the content. But thank you very much. That's a really important question.
I think if I may just add to what Michelle has just responded, because I think we are doing this much more in the food and agriculture more broadly, but we don't have like a very specific focus on fish and aquaculture systems. Is where we are developing methods that can be used to measure resilience and adaptation, working with various stakeholders, including in tailoring tools that whether it's private sector, government officials can be able to use to be able to demonstrate what is being achieved from the various types of interventions. And in addition to that, it's also some work we are doing on evidence synthesis, because I believe there's a lot of data out there. So it's not just the data that we need to collect directly from the interventions we are promoting, but we can also leverage some of the information that's already existing. So the Climate Action Program, the Alliance of Biodiversity and CGIAR have been doing some of that work, and we'll be happy maybe to have a conversation with you on how we can maybe test this out in other areas, or if you have ideas you'd like to bring on board. I don't know if there's any other question. Going once, going twice? Yes, I would like to move on to the next part of our session, which will be a panel discussion. And the idea is that we'll be going deeper into some of the elements that have been highlighted through the first presentation. The presenters highlighted some of the key innovations that are ready to scale. So in our panel discussion, we'll be looking at various aspects, including some of the policy pathways, financing, partnerships that can help us to scale some of these innovations that are already being tested and proven. And to join me in the panel discussion, we have Bernard Kimoro, who is the head of climate change and livestock sustainability at the State Department for Livestock at the Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock Development in Kenya. And he'll be bringing in the government and policy perspective. Next, we have Abhinav Gaurav, who is the lead of Sustainable Dairy at the Impact at Environmental Defense Fund. And he'll be bringing in the perspective in relation to finance and methane action. Next, we have Maya Rajasekaran, who is the Managing Director of the Americas at the Alliance of Biodiversity International in Seattle, and would be very important in highlighting the dimensions related to partnerships and scaling. We have apologies from Anna Maria, who is the Director of Adaptive and Equitable Food Systems at the Gates Foundation. She was to bring in the gender and social inclusion perspective, but I think this has already come out in some of the presentations that we've had. But be ready, I'll be shooting a gender question as we go to make sure that this is also addressed. And to start us off, maybe I'll start with you, Mr. Kimoro. Wait, I have to. Yes, we'll start off with you, Bernard. If maybe you can just bring in, especially a country perspective, because we've had various examples that have been highlighted where innovations are being tested, but we'd like to hear maybe from an African perspective with your role at the ministry in Kenya, how you've been including livestock and fish in your national climate plans, and what practical steps are needed to make sure that these solutions reach small-scale farmers and pastoralists.
Yeah, thank you very much. As always, a pleasure to be here and sit in front of this very big gathering. Today is Agriculture Day. I'm sure most people are running around and trying to fit in various activities which are taking place. First, I also want to appreciate the presentations that have been made previously, of course, from Michelle, Anthony, which have really highlighted some of the work that we have leveraged on in terms of supporting our inclusion of some of these very important interventions within the NDC. Let me start by saying that in Kenya, one of the things that we have identified and very early is that agriculture and food security is very critical, not only in sustainable development, but also in the climate targets. To take you back in 2020, let's say 2020, 2022 season, years, that period, we lost 2.5 million animals. As a result of that, our GDP contracted by about 3%, yeah, alone from the impacts of the climate change in Kenya. So that then meant that we need to have interventions, adaptation and resilience interventions for Kenya, and these have been well captured in various policy documents. The second aspect that also makes it very important is that when we do the quantification of the greenhouse gases and looking at all the key sectors in Kenya, agriculture contributes about slightly more than 1/3 of the emissions. Again, if you're looking at the climate interventions, then agriculture becomes very important. And mostly, if you look at the emissions, the trends show that for the agriculture sector, 90% of the emissions are actually from livestock. Yeah, so then again, you realize that we need to have livestock interventions within the climate targets that we have. So as a result of that, and based on the data that we are leveraged on, basically from the work that we have done with the International Livestock Research Institute, we have done quite a bit of work also gotten support from the Food and Agriculture Organization. We started by looking at more advanced methodologies of quantifying the emissions, because if you're talking about reducing emissions, for example, in our context, and using the most basic methodology, it would have meant that the only option would have been for us to reduce the livestock numbers, which is not a very good option. So then we advanced our quantification to Tier 2, which is slightly more advanced. And we started with the dairy industry, which is much more advanced and has a lot of data. So from there, then we're able in 2016 to start undertaking work on mitigation assessment. That then informed us for the first NDC to identify the specific targets for us to be able to address livestock mitigation challenges. All right. So in the first NDC, if you look at the INDC in 2015, we didn't have anything on livestock, but after we went into Tier 2 for dairy, we were then able to identify three main areas. The issues of productivity was a challenge, and we needed to look at what are the interventions that will address the aspects of productivity. And I think Anthony has done a very good job in highlighting the solutions, whether it was on nutrition, whether it is on genetics, whether we are looking at environmental aspects. So dairy, we were able to identify that we needed to improve the genetics of the animals, and we have targets. So we had the first specific target of what we call the dairy NAMA, which was included in our NDC. Yeah. And that has now transitioned into a new project, which is in the East African region called Dairy Interventions for Mitigation and Adaptation, or DAIMA in short, which IFAD is the accredited entity. So that was the first one. The second one is after we did the dairy, then we did an iteration to look at the other key livestock categories. Non-dairy cattle produces 45% of our livestock emissions. So then it becomes an important aspect. So we didn't have it in the first NDC or even the updated NDC targets. But for the NDC that we have for 2031 to 2035, we have put in a direct indicator of what you call the low carbon meat production with a focus on reducing methane intensity. Yeah, so we have a specific target. Of course, this covers cattle, sheep, and goats, because those are the ones that are found in the range areas. But in addition to that, we also have targets for restoration of land within the NDC. The main reason for doing this is that the moment you put your targets within the NDC, then you are able to demonstrate the opportunities that you have for mitigation, especially for emissions in your sector. And this is something that has helped us. We see there's a lot of interest in supporting this. Now, I've not talked much in terms of the fisheries, but in fisheries is a very unique sector. If you have to look at the mitigation challenges in fisheries, it goes beyond the production. It is what you call the life cycle emissions. For example, the energy used in transport for the vessels that actually do the fishing. So for fisheries, the focus has been more on adaptation target. In the first NDC, we didn't have any targets. But in the NDC for 2035, we have specific target for the fisheries and the aquaculture that targets adaptation. For example, improving restoration of mangrove, because some of those areas are the areas where the fisheries fish breeding takes place, and also looking at the species that are adaptable because water is becoming warmer. So some of the fish species are disappearing. So how do we ameliorate that kind of situation? So we have an experience of coming up with the targets, but it comes with the evidence that is needed to build that case to put the targets within the NDC. The second question.
Maybe we can come back to
Yeah,
the second question, because I want to build on quite a lot of the examples that you've provided, because you've made it clear how, for example, the policies in Kenya have evolved, the role of research in helping identifying some of the solutions that have been prioritized, and how you're also improving the evidence-based MRV to demonstrate how you're reducing emissions. But also an important point that you highlighted is how you are translating these policy commitments into projects that can then help to enhance implementation. And with that, I want to turn to Abhinav. Because based on, for example, some of the opportunities that Bernard has highlighted, do you see entry points or maybe changes that need to happen in the policy space or even in the financing to make some of the work that is there on methane reduction more attractive to investors?
First of all, thank you. Thank you to CGIAR. And also, I want to say that some of the presentations and some of the findings that was shared, it was spot on, because it shows that the science is ready. We need vehicles to take it forward and popularize it. Now, with that, my idea is that, if you want to take it to each country, then there are different contexts, and we'll have to see what context they operate in. Like, I'll give you an example from India. In India, half of our milk comes from buffaloes. 42% of the methane emission comes from water buffaloes. Now, none of the signs that exist in the global north can account for water buffaloes because they are very specific to South Asia, and it's even more specific for India. So there are global challenges, but the solution has to be very, very local. Um, I like how Anthony framed the NSS, North, South, South collaboration. Now that North, South, South collaboration should also not give a very, patronizing approach that North knows what to do and then South, South collaborate how to implement. The challenges are global, but then how to find solutions. The solution should come from the country. The country should see that how it wants to take some of the solution and scale it. In India, half of our methane emission comes from livestock sector itself. It's 5 times the energy sector and methane emissions from the energy sector. So it's huge, we know that. But then at the same time, 80 million farmers depend on dairy for their livelihood. Close to 1 billion people depend on dairy as a source of affordable protein. So any solution has to take into account the triple wins, that how we can safeguard productivity, production, how we safeguard farmers' livelihood and nutrition, and how we find a climate sustainable solution that can reduce the carbon footprint on milk. uh, what you said about financing needs, and on the financing need, EDF has just concluded a global survey of more than 150 ag finance companies. And I'm happy to say that the survey showed that 94% of the ag finance companies are accounting for climate factors in their risk portfolio. Because, we always see that ag finance companies are financing solution, but we also have to see how ag finance companies are accounting for climate for their own investments, because those investments, like either on aquaculture, on fisheries, on dairy, are also at risk because of climate change. So how they are accounting for that? They 94% of them are accounting for that. 70% of them, and especially in global south, has products, services, or both for farmers to adapt to be resilient or on mitigation front. So that's there. On aquaculture, I just want to quickly touch upon aquaculture as well. I think there's a greater need to also link how climate change is, like we have these understanding that climate change is impacting the overall fish catch, but how it is impacting human health and human nutrition, because that will be a larger net we'll be able to frame, that these things are interlinked, how catch is getting impacted because of climate change, and how this is affecting food sources. Uh, Again, giving an example from our India work, what we realized that fish bycatch, or the trash fish, which used to be a nuisance for the farmers, is now becoming a source of protein for the poultry feed industry. And so farmers are going for overfishing of this trash fish, and it is becoming a marine ecological challenge, because you are overdrawing, and for a poor fisherman, he can draw or she can draw whatever he or she gets. So in that ways, we need to look at it from a more holistic angle and not into silos.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for those examples. And again, I'll piggyback on what you've just said as I turn on to Meyer, because he has highlighted the uniqueness of context, because some of the value chains are very context specific, that we cannot have one size fits all. But he has also highlighted the role of research. We know in this case, we are seeing the role of the government, the investors, also underscoring the importance of partnerships. And I wanted to find out, maybe from your experience, what are some of the models you've seen working in the way we manage to connect between research and implementation, taking into account some of these context-specific and entry points with regard to partnerships?
I want to build on what Anthony said on the importance of feeds and forages in the livestock sector. And, a lot of research has been done in terms of producing brachiaria hybrids, which are deep rooting forage, which has the ability to capture carbon and at the same time have a high productivity. So when these forages are available, but the production of forage seeds and to really take it to scale is not a simple task. And it is only very, very few providers out there in the market which can actually do that and produce seeds and distribute it. So CGIAR went into a public-private partnership with the Papilotla, who has the ability to kind of really do this at a scale and take it to different parts of the world, including Latin America and Africa, with a very exclusive agreement at the same time safeguarding that public investments are protected. It's not so that, we make sure that in certain conditions, these investments and what the, intellectual property rights are also protected for what CGIAR is doing. So public-private partnerships are going to be extremely critical in making sure that when there are certain types of products that are available, it may not be a public-private, but it's public, private sector who has the ability to really take it to scale. So that's a very, very specific, concrete example that I want to provide, coming from Latin America, but is already reaching in Africa too. In Africa, farmers do buy the forage seeds and mainly use for cut and carry system. But in the Latin America sector, there are millions of hectares of forages. And I think the number of millions of hectares of forages available in Latin America is much higher than what is rice planted around the world. So huge potential for mitigation, huge potential for capturing much more carbon in the soils and also improving the soil structure and improving the soil health conditions. I'm going to keep it very brief in the interest of time.
Thank you so much for that. So I'm going to turn to all the panelists with a question of how you are integrating gender and social inclusion, whether it's in the research, in the investments, and in the policy. And after that, I'll be turning on to the audience in case you have any question or any experience you would like to share from your context before we close. I don't know who wants to go first on how you're integrating gender and social inclusion.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a very critical point. For us in Kenya, if you look at especially the livestock sector, labor is mainly provided by women. The benefits may not so much go to the women. Yeah, so it's been a challenge. So if you look at the policy documents that we have made a deliberate effort to ensure that they are inclusive. They cover the aspects of the benefits that will actually go directly to the women, the youth, and people who are vulnerable generally. So we have the Kenya Climate Smart Agriculture Strategy, but more recently we developed a gender action plan specific for the agriculture sector. And that is the one that is mainstreaming and ensuring that we have inclusive planning at all levels, whether we have programs, whether we have projects. We ensure that all this is aligned to the gender action plan and the Kenya Climate Smart Agriculture Strategy that already identifies this as critical. So it's aligned, and the most important thing also is the fact that our constitution has given very clear guidelines in terms of participation of all gender, of all sections of the community that should be involved in development planning. So it's very clear from the constitution. We take it to the national policies, sectoral policies, and now to the sub-national policies, guided by the gender action plan that we have developed.
So in India, I'll be sticking to India because that's from where I am. So 70% of the total labor force in dairy is women. But what we have seen that less than 10% of the land ownership or asset ownership is in women's name. So it becomes very difficult for a woman to, like, they do the labor, but they are not able to, as my previous speaker said, that they are doing the labor, but they are not getting benefits out of it. They are not getting market access out of it. And especially in activities like credits and training, because the land is not in their name, so they can't take the key decisions. So that on the gender front, from the climate level, productivity, efficiency, better farms, better managed farms. What we've seen that as the farm sizes grow, as the smallholder farmer becomes medium and large farmers, there's a defeminization of farm operations also. You tend to get the decision-making moves from women to the men. So we are keeping these things in our minds while we are developing project. We have a climate smart dairy entrepreneurship project, and we have kept a mandate that at least 50% of the service sector entrepreneurs who are providing key inputs like feed and fodder to the farmers or AI services should be women itself. So that's how we are trying to address the gender question as well. Yeah.
For research and development, gender is always a key consideration. And in our strategy, we always look at where there are opportunities to incorporate a gender lens into it. And, for example, agro-silvopastoral system, women prefer potentially different types of forages, or maybe they prefer legumes because legumes have the higher ability to capture carbon and better for soils. And it might be intercropped with other productive crops. So really always an opportunity to see, depending upon the context specific particular systems that you're looking at. And, research and development organization like CGIAR always looking to see where there's possibility to be very gender sensitive to that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I don't know if there are any quick questions from the audience. We have like 2 minutes left. Okay, so I think it was a very insightful discussion. Thank you all for the great examples, and a round of applause as the panelists take their seats. I think we only have like 1 minute left. So before the session closes, I would just like to thank you all for coming. I think the session was very insightful. I for sure enjoyed the conversation, and take this opportunity to interact with any of the panelists in case you see opportunities or you would like to learn more from them. But thank you so much for coming, and wishing you a good afternoon. Thank you.